along with about a 15-minute Q&A at the end. And then we are going to, if you want to access closed captioning, you can go ahead and access closed captioning on the bottom. And then that should be able to do that. And you might just have to click that for me, Linda. Thank you. And then when we're looking at any technical difficulties, just go ahead and make sure that you stay muted and your distractions. We actually have you locked into muted. And the chat is to myself, and we are, and Linda as well, and we're going to just go ahead and take that so that stays within a non-distracting environment. We would absolutely love a way for you to go ahead and tweet out. We have our patent literacy tweet. You may see mine already. I already tweeted it out just now, how excited I am about this session. And I am so honored to introduce Linda Diamond to the field in Pennsylvania in a lot of ways. It's one of our first times that we've had her. I think we're going to be inviting her back as much as we can. She is here to talk with us today about the MTSS for secondary schools with a real literacy focus. Thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. Well, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. And I am looking forward to speaking with all of you about our issues that we have for, unfortunately, too many of our older students. And I'm going to focus on middle school and high school. And why I'm focusing on this is because of these very unfortunate statistics, which some of you, I'm sure, know. We do have a large number of students in the middle schools and high school ages in the juvenile justice system. And most of those students, 85%, are functionally low literate. And if they've been in the juvenile incarceration system, they have a much higher rate of dropping out of high school and a probability of adult incarceration. High school dropouts, as some of you probably know, are 3.5 times more likely to be arrested than the students who graduate. In my state, California, 75% of African-American males don't meet the state reading standards. And we have 3 out of 5 who cannot read in the US prison system. There is even more of an unstated problem, and that is the link between dyslexia and suicide. It's not something that there's been a lot of study around, although there are some studies that tell a very sad story. In 2017, a study was done that showed that students with specific learning disabilities, and you probably know the vast majority of those have trouble reading. Of that group, 46% are more likely to attempt suicide. Another study found that 89% of suicide notes contained spelling errors that were typical of dyslexia. And we also know that these children are 3 times higher to attempt suicide. These are the unstated and too often ignored results of failing to help our students who are in the upper grades. Now, who are these kids? Well, some of them don't understand the words. That is, they cannot decipher them, they can't decode them, and even if they can, they don't have the vocabulary knowledge. Some of them don't understand syntax, and they struggle with complex sentences. And consequently, if they struggle with sentences, they can't build a text base. They don't understand the structure and organization of text. And they also don't build a mental model. They often don't have the skills for academic conversations. And I'm spotlighting this, middle and high school teachers might not know how to teach reading. I know this all too well. I was a high school English teacher. My first job was in a high school where I was assigned a group of students in a class called Skills Lab. This was my first year, brand new teacher. My major was medieval English literature, and I was right out of the first group of the Bay Area Writing Project that later became the National Writing Project. So I knew how to teach literature and I knew how to teach writing. And yet I had a group of students, all boys, ages 15, 16, 17, and Howard, who was 18. Everybody has a Howard. And these were kids reading about third grade level. They did not qualify for special education. The other quality they had in common was what the principal told me, the only piece of information I was given, and it was they all need a C average. Why was that? That's because they were all on the teams. So here I was, completely unprepared to teach reading, and yet I had students who couldn't read. So I had to do something. Either I was going to retire quickly and go into real estate, or I had to learn. So what I did, thanks to one of my colleagues, was go to Oregon, where I was trained by a man, a great man named Siegfried Engelman, and I bet some of you know who he is and was, in DI, direct instruction, corrective reading. And that was how I learned how to teach reading. But the sad reality is that most middle and high school teachers don't necessarily know, nor did they expect they would have to know. It shouldn't be that we have all these students in the secondary level who did not learn to read. Now, in addition, we have our multilingual learners and our speakers of English language variations, who are also struggling with academic language and syntax and vocabulary in particular. And for our multilingual learners, we have to remember that they are often learning to acquire the English language at the same time that they are trying to learn content. So let's break this down a bit more about these students. And this is why we need MTSS in the secondary level. So I'm going to use the simple view, which I'm sure many of you know. The simple view of reading, well-researched, over 150 studies, show that reading comprehension is the product of word recognition times language comprehension. It's a multiplication problem. That means 0 in either category results in 0. So we have the students who struggle with word recognition, particularly in the older grades. We'll see this with multisyllabic reading word difficulty, but often they have holes in their single syllable word reading, particularly variant vowels and often long vowel patterns in general. Some may have phonological difficulties, in which case we need to consider dyslexia. And they all will likely have insufficient automaticity and will sound disfluent. Then we have the students who have language comprehension issues. And obviously it could be both word recognition and language comprehension. So there are students with oral language limits. We have our English language development need for our multilingual learners. We'll have the students who lack general and domain-specific academic vocabulary, and students with limited understanding of syntax, which will severely hamper them when they're reading complex sentences and complex text. And of course, will result in difficulty making inferences, and all of them will have limited background in world knowledge because, of course, reading contributes to our world knowledge. So we're going to take a poll and begin to think about what are the roadblocks to implementing MTSS in a secondary school, a middle and high school. So Lisa, if you can roll that poll now, that would be great.
That's great participation. We're at almost 80% here for our poll.
Yeah, that's terrific. Okay, we could probably end the poll and show the results. Wow. Okay, thank you, Lisa. Can you close the poll, Lisa?
Yes, I did. If you just want to close it off your screen, it's good.
Well, it doesn't let me do that.
Is there an X on the top?
Nope. Hang on. Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you. So most of you answered all of the above. And that actually is the correct answer. But I want to talk about some other issues. So in addition to the ones that were in the poll, as I had mentioned before, we have educator knowledge issues. We also have staffing issues, the appropriate type of staff to work with these kids. However, I'm going to ascribe almost every other challenge to a lack of will. Because if we really have the will to do something about these students before it's too late, we would figure out how to deal with graduation requirements, scheduling, the educator knowledge, and staffing. So here's what we wish as high school and middle school educators. We wish that our kids all came to us with strong language, they're motivated, they want to learn, they're eager, they've got word recognition and good background knowledge. We also would hope that our teachers all know how to create positive classroom environments and they have ongoing professional learning, not just one-shot professional learning. They're treated truly like professionals and they all have outstanding instructional practices. They know how to engage our students. They know how to correct in positive ways, check kids, use the students' feedback, and they know practices. In addition, we would hope that we had an excellent high quality core curriculum, but we also would want specialized materials that teachers know how to use when they have students who are not successful, and they'd have a lot of opportunity for students to practice. That's not our reality. This is our reality. The students are not well prepared. They come to us with reading and writing gaps. Our teachers are not prepared for students well below grade level and often do not have ongoing professional learning and support and have limited time. And the core curriculum itself may be weak to begin with, but certainly there are no materials to deal with significant literacy gaps. Grade level curriculum does not contain the materials for students who are well below grade level. Louise Spear-Swerling did a very interesting analysis in a wonderful book, RTI and Reading Profiles, where she identified 3 different profiles of common reading difficulties. The first group is the specific word reading difficulty. In the primary grades, that makes up the bulk of those students with difficulty. For older students, about 33% have specific word reading difficulties, and you could see what that entails. Phonological awareness, decoding, but they often have greater or average oral vocabulary, and their oral comprehension, their listening comprehension is usually strong. But consequently, their reading comprehension is below. Remember the simple view. They've got the oral language, the language comprehension, but they lack the word recognition. So reading comprehension suffers. Then she identified another 33% who fall in the specific reading comprehension difficulties. They can decode. They have good phonological awareness, but they fall down in oral language comprehension, and their vocabularies are often below average. Again, the result is a lack of reading comprehension. And finally, she identified a percent for the mixed reading difficulty of 33%. These are the students that have both word reading difficulties and specific reading comprehension difficulties. I remember when I first saw this analysis by her, I thought, oh, good, only 33% have word reading difficulties. Well, then I saw mixed reading, and then I realized 66% could have word reading difficulties. So now I realize why we have and why I had the students that I had in my first year of teaching. So what do they need? Well, the kids with specific word reading difficulties are going to need specific decoding instruction. And it could also include phonemic awareness with letters as rapidly as possible for this age group. They're going to need fluency work. For sure, they're going to need support with multisyllabic word decoding. That means morphology and structural analysis. And they need to connect spelling, reading, and writing. The students who truly only have, and I'm saying only because this one's actually tougher to address, the reading comprehension difficulties, they're going to need specific instruction in how to evaluate and synthesize information in syntactic structures and language and vocabulary. We were part of a group that developed a vocabulary supplemental intervention for middle school. And one of the things we discovered, these were students who could decode, even read with relative fluency, but their comprehension was very weak. This was a US Department of Ed funded research study. We worked on vocabulary intensively. That was not enough to boost their comprehension. And part of that is because they had already missed so much from not having their needs met earlier. We also, again, need to integrate reading and writing. They need to learn specific text structures, how text works when it's narrative, when it's literary, versus when it's informational. They need ample discussion, and they need a deep development of world knowledge. Now, what about those kids with both? Well, they need it all. And that will lead to what I'm going to talk about later, and it will relate to scheduling, because those students significantly below who have both serious reading difficulties, decoding and comprehending, but do not necessarily qualify for special ed, will need a replacement core. And that sounds like a bad word, because we're so programmed now to want everyone to be at grade level in a grade level program. And that is the ideal. But if you are a high school student reading at 3rd grade level, this may be your last stop on the road to prison. And it shouldn't be, as the First Step Act mandated, that the first time young people got diagnosed and supported with dyslexia or reading difficulty was when they went to prison. So we will talk some more about that urgency. Now, what do the interventions need to look like? What do we have to consider? Well, for all types of difficulty, we have to think about group size. Obviously, the most severe the difficulty, the smaller the group size. We have to think about intervention time. For kids who are well below grade level in the upper grades, 20 minutes twice a week is not going to do it. Intervention time has to almost double for every grade level that a student is below where they should be. And also we have to make sure that the instruction is unambiguous and engaging. Engaging for this level is so important because think about this. If you have been a struggling reader and you're now in middle school or high school, school is just plain depressing. It's a miracle you're still here and haven't dropped out. So we have to make what we do motivating and engaging for these students who have been completely demoralized throughout their educational careers. The students with word reading difficulties, for sure, we're going to have to employ explicit, systematic instruction, but it has to be targeted. We can't just go back to the beginning. We have to identify with appropriate diagnostic measures starting points so we minimize wasted time. And for our comprehension-based difficulties, I've already talked about what we're going to need to do for these students. So what can we do and what might it look like? Well, there are a number of schools that have done what's called a WIN schedule. WIN stands for what I need. It's a really cool idea because instead of pulling kids out of classes, they're given an extra period that the entire school is on. So the kids who need intervention go to their WIN class and they get intervention. The kids who don't need intervention go to that same time slot and get enrichment. It's often called an I or E period. So the beauty of this is we avoid that after school or only on Saturday, when a lot of these struggling students are either caring for younger siblings or having to work. We have to make sure that Tier 1 is appropriately rigorous and that the teachers in every single content area have been prepared to scaffold, because they're still going to have to address such things as vocabulary in their content area, the way their text is organized. History teachers, for example, are going to need to understand that nominalization of words will be more difficult for multilingual learners often. What I mean by nominalization, and it appears in history texts more than any other kind, is where we might be using a word such as in preparing for the long trek on the Oregon Trail, etc. But instead we'll see the preparation for the long trek. Preparation is a nominalization of the verb. What happens is it causes students to lose sight of what the subject is and what the verb is. We also have to establish a screening system, and we could always start with the prior year's end of year assessment measure, if it's a year that one was given, as an initial base. but we need to develop what's referred to as an early warning system. We can't wait. When we're delivering tier 2 and 3 for these students, we have to do it right away and regularly. Now, this issue of early and regularly and not wait reminds me of a young man I interviewed. His name is Dr. Keon Anderson. You can probably look him up on the internet. Keon is spelled Keyon. Dr. Anderson's mother in first grade recognized that there was something wrong. But at that point, the school said he'll outgrow it. We've all heard this. Well, Keon didn't outgrow it. And it wasn't until 9th grade, he was placed in special ed, but he wasn't getting anything he needed. But in 9th grade, his special ed teacher had been trained in the Linda Mood Bell system and recognized that Keon had dyslexia. And he learned to read. And he's Dr. Keon Anderson because he went through the University of Southern California, got his doctorate, and there are many books on Amazon he has written that relate to these issues and the challenges that Keon experienced. The other reason I'm talking about this and why I'm passionate about it, and I believe Lisa knows this, my brother was diagnosed with dyslexia. Nobody knew what to do with him, and he had no help. And when he was 21, he committed suicide. And as I said, there is a link. We know it, and we can't wait. And this is why we have to have the will to do something early. If we do a tiered system properly, then that leaves our special ed staff to be able to focus on the most severe learning deficits. And we also have to make sure that there's ongoing and targeted professional learning, and it can't just be in the core curriculum. If we have intervention curricula, as we should, the teachers need support and training in that also. Of course, we're going to have to provide support to all content area teachers. But I'd like to say something about this, and we will look at it later when we talk about this some more. But the key issue is that teachers in all contents need strategies to build vocabulary knowledge specific to their discipline, collaboration structures, how to help students make inferences, and how to help students understand the structure of the text that they're reading. All content area teachers, and that includes English teachers, will need this kind of ongoing scaffolding so that they can help students. All content teachers can help students with multilingual words using their own content words. They can break them up. They can parse the syllables. They can parse complex syntax for students. So there are ways that all content teachers can help. They also need to know how to have structured discussions, because through discussion, many students can grasp their grade level content. They still have to have high standards. And again, they're going to have to build motivation and engagement. They're going to need to focus on essential content and get rid of the fluff. And they're going to have to integrate reading, writing, and discussion. So we're going to bust a myth. This is a myth. It's a very powerful myth. And Lisa, can you roll that poll? It looks like most people answered. Some are changing their answers, I think. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll for sharing the results. All right, most of you said true. This is what I consider a myth, an urban legend. And why I'm saying that's an urban legend is for this reason. It is true that all teachers use reading, or most do, in their content. And all teachers have to help their students access their text. But not all teachers are going to be teaching phonics or phonemic awareness for those students who still need those basic reading skills any more than we would expect a general practitioner to perform brain surgery. Not only does that statement, all teachers are reading teachers, do injustice to all of the content teachers who think that they now too have to teach phonics, basic syllable understanding. Certainly they can work on morphology in their content. Certainly they can help students, but they are not the precision reading teachers. And I think this idea has done harm because it makes everyone have to be a generalist without any specialists. And for our most at-risk students, they need the brain surgeon who can do the heavy lifting of those early foundational skills that all too many students did not learn. So let's start in at the tiered levels in our middle and high school. We're going to start with tier 1. Clearly, we need a content-rich curriculum, and it needs to be implemented with fidelity. But we also need ways to differentiate and scaffold for the grade level content. We've got to design an effective early warning system, and you're going to be getting a link in a slide when you get access to all this to information on how to design an effective early warning system. Again, we can start with data from the prior year's universal screening. Ideally, it was done. If there wasn't, there would be a state assessment that probably will give a starting point to look at the students who aren't where they should be on that measure. They need ample opportunity to write and talk about text. We have to be sure that our practices are culturally and linguistically responsive. And we've got to make sure that we have skillful teachers who know how to adjust and motivate and when to worry. When to worry means I'm noticing that I have these students who cannot keep up. One of the early warning signs, besides their writing and spelling and their silence in the classroom, is not turning in assignments. And why is that an early warning? Well, some may ascribe that to laziness or the student just doesn't want to do it. If you are reading at grade level, an assignment might take you 20 minutes. If you're reading well below grade level, that same assignment might take 2 hours. And if you have to do something like that for every class that you're taking, you just wear out. So not turning in assignments along with spelling, which is a really early indicator, along with not speaking up, will tell the teacher that something is not working and we better look more closely. Now, what would tier 2 or tier 3 look like? Well, it's Tier 2 is often an extra support period. This is where the win period can come in, but it's every day. It's not 2 times a week. It's daily, and you're going to see some sample schedules. A long win period could be added, in which case that could even be tier 3, more than just a 40-minute time. And that's for the students most at risk. That there's usually intervention or support staff who would teach that. So it's specialized. It doesn't mean an English teacher might not say, I want to add that in, but they need to have the knowledge and the skill and the materials and the support. For just tier 2, we might be able to get away with 3 or more times a week. For tier 3, we certainly need daily. The materials have to target the need. It has to be based on what we identified as a result of good diagnostic assessment. They have to be monitored. And many secondary schools might really only need a tier 1 and a 3 and not a 2. If the core teachers have been trained in very good scaffolding, have extra time, like a blocked period, they may be able to address many of the tier 2 type needs, but there will have to be a tier 3 for our most vulnerable learners. Now, we did a study in a California school district where we utilized 2 models. For tier 2, they had their regular English class, but they also had a backup class, and everyone had it. For tier 3, we had a replacement core. They did not go to their regular English. They had a time that was intensive, over 2 hours. And what ended up showing up at the end in the study was the students in the replacement core. And by the way, they were using at the time language exclamation for their replacement core. Now it's language exclamation live. Those students actually outperformed on the state test at that time the students who were in the regular English classes. It was very interesting. So, materials, that's another piece of this. So what do we need in tier 1? Well, we need material that's been vetted. And I'm listing here many of the programs that are on EdReports that are tier 1 programs. EdReports did not vet or review intervention programs, but all of these work very well. You'll see some familiar ones, Amplify, StudySync, ELA, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt into literature. My Perspectives used to be published by Pearson. They have now renamed a publisher Savas, and there's Expeditionary Learning. These are all very good tier 1 grade level curricula. What about tier 2 and tier 3, where we have to get serious? There's a really interesting curriculum, relatively new, called The Third Quest, published by Ankara Publishing, authored by Marilyn Sprick, who many of you may know if you've ever heard of Read Well. That was her primary grade program. This one is designed for older students. Of course, there's rewards for targeting multisyllabic words. SIPS Plus from the Center of the Collaborative Classroom focuses on the foundational skills around decoding and multisyllabic words. Read 180, now published by Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, language exclamation live. You give a placement and start these kids at an appropriate targeted level. Flex Literacy, McGraw-Hill. If you're just working on multisyllabic words and vocabulary knowledge, structural analysis, Morpheme Magic by Dr. Deb Glazer. Very cool, relatively new. And there's Lexia Learning Power Up Literacy. That is a computerized program. And I don't always like to just rely on computerized programs. Now for tier 3, we're going to go intense. Corrective reading, an oldie but a goodie from the National Institute for Direct Instruction. SIPS Plus, because it could go down all the way to the beginning levels of decoding. The third quest. Language Exclamation Live, again, very comprehensive. Wilson Reading, and then Read 180, likely with System 44 added. So what else do we need? We need universal screening. As you're beginning to see, MTSS is all of this. It's the teacher, it's the time, it's the assessment, it's the curriculum, it's all of the above. So here are some universal screeners. One of my favorites is the test of silent word reading fluency from ProEd. Why do I like it? It's a group measure. If I'm in middle and high school, I want a group measure. And it only takes a minute. It takes longer to score and analyze than it takes to give. It's a very interesting assessment. You'll have to look online to see why it's so unique. The test of silent contextualized reading fluency, also by ProEd, again, takes hardly any time to administer. It's a group test. Of course, there's the Gates-McGinnity. There is, as your starting point, a state measure to tell you who's at risk. Acadience Reading Diagnostic has a new measure called CFL, Comprehension Fluency and Oral Language. Very cool. Something to look at. M-Class Lectura for Spanish, K6, Acadience Reading 7-8, the SARA, which is done by John Sabatini and has reading component subparts, but ETS has picked up Reading Basics, also called RISE, by Sabatini, a very good screener for the older students. Of course, some of you know MAISE. A MAISE test is just a passage, usually takes about 3 minutes. A lot of standardized CBMs now include a MAISE. Days for Dibbles, and they go up, I believe, to 8th grade. I think Fastbridge, FAST has it now, Ames Web. And the idea is that it's a group administered passage where students select the word that fits. In order to identify that word, the implication is they understood the text. So it's an efficient screener, it's low cost, and it can work as a progress monitor also for these older students. So this would be something I would be very interested in taking a look at. So what are my screening recommendations for middle school? First of all, I want to benchmark my kids in grade 6 with a universal screener, usually a CBM, 3 times a year. I can start with MAISE because it's a group measure. But I might have to go lower if I have students who show up with difficulties. And I'm going to show you a flow chart in a moment. At the end of grade 6, that will be my benchmark for grade 7 as an initial planning tool. At the end of grade 7, because I still am going to do some screening with 7th graders, but I'm not going to have to do as much if they've continued and I've already identified them from 6th grade. But I need something at the end to plan for grade 8. In grade 8, I'm going to have multiple gatings. In the middle or the end of the year, I'm going to take a look at some initial screener, and I can certainly use my state measures as a starting point from 7th grade, and then I'm going to have to see who in 8th grade needs more assistance. In grade 9, I want some sort of universal screening at the end of grade 8. to help plan. And remember, screeners are not diagnostics. So here's what happens in high school. Starting with my grade 8, I'm going to take a look at the kids who weren't where they should be on their standardized measure or their grade 8 data. And now I need to drill down a bit. So I might do a test like the test of silent word reading fluency, because that's going to give me a grade level norm. I'm also going to follow up with those kids and determine if I need any kind of specialized diagnostics. I could still give an oral reading fluency and a maze. I'm just going to use the 8th grade tables. And I'm going to have to do individual skill screening for any student who comes newly to my school and we become aware is performing poorly in content area. 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, I'm going to have to screen all new kids if they weren't already there in 9th grade, and those who are performing poorly in their content area. And I'm going to have to use some diagnostic measures. So this is a flow chart. I apologize for how difficult it is to read, but it is available in my assessment book called Assessing Reading Multiple Measures, which I believe many people know about. It's available through Arena Press, ARENA, or on the corelearn.com website, CORELEARN.com, all one word. And this is an example of a diagnostic plan. If we start with students and their comprehension test, whether it's a state test or a maze, is where they should be, we probably don't have to do a lot more other than monitor how they're performing in the actual content we're teaching. But if they're not doing well on their initial comprehension measure, state test or a maze, for example, now I need to drill down. I can start with, if my school has an intervention program, like, for example, language exclamation live, I could give one of the placement tests that go with it, and that will tell me if the student needs more. Or I can give an oral fluency, and that could be up through 8th grade now, and possibly a vocabulary measure. And if they're fine there, but remember, they only got there because they weren't where they should be on comprehension, I now have to also work on comprehension. However, if they weren't where they should be on oral fluency or vocabulary, for example, or an intervention placement, I need to do some sort of phonics screener. There's a very good new tool called Key Phonics. You can look it up, Key Phonics. I believe it's .com. It might be .net, but Key Phonics, all one word. And Key Phonics was just recently acquired by Renaissance. And it's both a screener, a survey, and a diagnostic tool that will tell you exactly where the holes are. However, if they're fine on phonics and multisyllabic words, I'm adding here, then we're working primarily on fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, and spelling. If they weren't fine in decoding, now I need to give some kind of phonemic awareness measure. Might be a segmentation measure, it might be a deletion test, and now we're in the individual assessment. If they're fine on their phonological awareness, we still have to deal with phonics, spelling, fluency, etc. You can begin to see it's additive. And this is what is meant by more of a diagnostic plan than just a screening plan. So let's look at one of the hardest issues, scheduling. Well, what do schools do? Well, some do outside the existing schedule. That's the least desirable solution. Others add another class by shortening class time and tightening transitions. That's pretty good. There's the dual blocks with core and an added support. Some use the elective periods, but it often means taking away an elective, which may be the only time of day that some of these students actually enjoy school. Then there's the win block, as I've spoken about, that's most desirable. And then we have to focus in the middle school, in particular at 6th grade, and then again at 9th grade. Those are the best grades to target right away. These are some sample schedules. It happens, these are all schools in Massachusetts. A number of schools in Massachusetts are using the WIN schedule idea. And you could see in this first chart, there's a core that's 80 minutes, but there's that IE, intervention and enrichment period. Every grade has it. So the whole school goes to it. So they're not taking away from something. You'll see that there is a split core, 3A and 3B, and it's just that lunch intervened, so their second half was after lunch. Now there's a team-based intervention and enrichment approach, and this is where it's back to back, and it's all 8th grade, and they're essentially getting 2 periods and can mix and match the students, and students can move when you've got 2 40 minutes, or excuse me, when you've got your cores at, I'm sorry, when you've got your interventions at different times in the day, but they still have a double core because it's a teamed period where some intervention is also taking place. The last one is the replacement core. These are students who have such intense needs that they are not going to a regular core. They're getting, in this case, 2 hours of an intensive intervention. So the other issue, remember we said a challenge was staffing. Who's teaching these tiered interventions? It could be the language arts teacher, with particularly if it's double blocked, does much more scaffolding and might not need additional resources if there are already some available with the core program. If the school is doing before, during, or after school, who's doing that? If it's a computerized intervention, that can help with a staffing need where a regular teacher is teaching and some kids are at the computer. But remember, this is just tier 2. It's not nearly enough time for students at tier 3. The universal intervention period, like WIN, could be done. We've also seen a push-in where a specialist or an interventionist goes into a double blocked period and works in a small group with the students who have particular needs. Here, also, the central decision makers have to be willing to make that shift and to shift some responsibilities from the regular class to the intervention sections. So there are resources. When you get these slides, you'll have these links. One is from the Center on Multi-Tiered System of Support, a fabulous brief on how to design an early warning intervention and monitoring system. It's MTSS for Success. And you can go to their resources and you could type in secondary school and you'll see this resource. Another fantastic resource, same website, is an article on scheduling at the middle school. It was called Implementing RTI. It was done before things shifted to MTSS, but the scheduling ideas are the same. Fantastic article that's very helpful. This one is an older article. It was done in 2010 by the National High School Center and the Center on Instruction, and it's tiered interventions in high school. Nothing's really changed. And the reason it hasn't changed is most high schools haven't implemented any kind of tiered intervention yet. So the information contained in this document is extremely useful. This is a summary of what it contains. First of all, it's a description of an RTI framework and the necessary components. Secondly, it illustrates how they were implemented in 8 schools, which is fantastic because it shows you the models. And it also talks about the special contextual factors that were unique and how they affected their implementation decisions, because this will not be one size fits all. Now, why is this so urgent? I would bet there are young people and even adults that many of us did not even know were struggling. And I'm going to show you one of those right now.
You couldn't read. You had a very thick Bahamian accent.
I did.
And you decide to try and become an actor?
I did.
Why did you go that route? It kind of makes no sense.
I had no way of knowing that there is a madness to what I'm trying to do.
After a disastrous audition with the American Negro Theater, where Poitier could barely read the script, an act of kindness at his job as a dishwasher changed his life.
One of the waiters, a Jewish guy, elderly man. I had a newspaper, and he walked over to me and he looked at me and he said, "What's new in the paper?" And I looked up at this man and I said to him, "I can't tell you what's up in the paper." I said, "because I can't read very well." He said, "Let me ask you something. Would you like me to read with you?"
Wow.
I said to him, "Yes, if you like." Now let me tell you something. Every night, the place is closed. Everyone's gone. And he sat there with me, week after week after week. I learned a lot. And then things began to happen.
Well, who knows who the Sidney Poitiers are in our classrooms if we don't take the time and have the will to do what we need to. I did put together an additional resource list that I think is very useful. One is that MTSS for Success site that's managed by AIR, funded by the US Department. The National Center on Intensive Intervention. There's an article, it's an old article I wrote years ago, and it still is relevant today because it's how to set up a multi-tiered support system, triage for struggling adolescent readers, a systems approach. There is great material at the Keys to Literacy site, Joan Sedita. Joan has focused significantly on grades 4 through 12. And there are wonderful resources. Her particular piece, Adolescent Literacy, Addressing the Needs of Students in Grades 4 through 12, is well worth reading. There is a brand new center out of the University of Houston focused on older multilingual learners. It's the Center for the Success of English Learners, highly funded. They're conducting research targeting older English language learners who have significantly been forgotten. So I am happy to stop sharing my screen now and address any questions